Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology for Paramedics. So this is our very first video. It's going to be the only time I'm going to give a brief introduction, but what I do want to say quickly is that basically this is my online whiteboard, and so I'm just going to teach the class as if we were having it in the classroom. I'm going to write a lot of stuff that I would normally write on the whiteboard in class, and other than that, that's about it. Every proper introduction to anatomy and physiology has to start with some basic definitions, so that's exactly what we're going to do as we overview the human body. Number one, anatomy. Anatomy is a study of the internal and external structures that make up the body. It will be useful to simply associate the word anatomy with structure, because as we compare it to physiology, which physiology is the study of how a living organism performs its vital functions, and we associate the word physiology with function, you can see that there's an incredibly necessary relationship between the structure of something and its corresponding function. How something is built affects how it can work. So therefore, we have to study anatomy and physiology together in order to appreciate the contributions from both. I want to also just introduce the term pathophysiology, because pathophysiology is essentially it's sort of the gray line between where anatomy and physiology ends and where medicine starts. So the definition of pathophysiology is that it's the study of the effects of disease on an organ or an organ system and how it functions. So I just want to mention that we desire, basically by studying anatomy and physiology, to know how the healthy body functions at baseline. And so if we, then say, oh, well, this patient has some sort of problem that we want to be able to understand, we can say, well, we know anatomy and physiology, so we can guess how the body's going to react in disease. We can understand why the body reacts the way it does. And then we can also understand why pre-hospital interventions are appropriate for certain types of problems. On that note, let's move on and talk about the structural organization of the body. So this is going to be a little anatomy and a tiny bit of physiology to go with it. We're going to start to see immediately the relationship between the structure and the function. So the structural organization basically refers to the building blocks, how the human body is assembled, how it's put together, how it's able to use all these little tiny pieces to essentially work like a machine. It's incredibly efficient. It's incredibly responsive. It's extremely fascinating how it works. But in order to really be able to appreciate and understand all of that, we need to be able to discuss and understand the organization at each level. So the first level is chemical. So this is going to correspond to our first lecture topic beyond the introduction, which is going to be chemistry. So chemical refers to atoms that combine to form molecules, and these molecules are going to build the basic structure of the human body. They're also going to allow for various types of chemical reactions to occur. So you're going to find that chemical level of organization dictates so many of the important necessary things that happen in the body. And if we don't have a grasp of this, then we're going to miss out on really appreciating some of the things that the body can do and needs to do in order to survive. The next level of organization, so this is just going to be like just building blocks on top of blocks, is the cellular level. So cells make up the smallest living units in the body. And I really want to differentiate this from chemical, because nothing in chemical is living. It's the cells that are alive, and we're going to get to sort of what makes something alive shortly. But for now, understand that cells, because they are alive, each cell can perform many different functions independently. And although the human body is constructed in a way that we want the body cells to integrate with one another in order to work, we do have to understand that cells independently can do things like take in nutrients and produce energy and use energy to perform their functions. All right, the next level up is tissue. So tissues basically are a group of similar cells that work together to perform a specific function. So I haven't given you any examples yet, but I do want to start to do that as we move forward. So we could talk about how the molecules build the cellular structures, but we could also then say, and this will be a little bit, I think, easier to grasp as we get higher up in the organizational levels. So there are many types of cells. There are specific cells. So we could talk about like contraction cells of the heart, for example. So there are different types of cells that make up the heart, but one of the types is cells that specifically are there for contracting purposes. So a tissue would refer to the contracting cells as a congregate, and then we'll talk about how that sort of group of cells can then work with other things as well. Moving on to our next level of organization, we have the organ. So an organ consists of two or more groups of tissues that work together to perform a specific function. It'll probably be, again, more obvious as we rise in the hierarchy here, but an example of an organ found in the human body would be the heart. So we could take the types of cells that we already know exist, contracting cells, and then we could also consider conducting cells and other types of cells too. And the combination of those types of cells working together allow the heart to do its function, which is to contract, to beat, to pump the blood around the body. But the heart needs some other things in order to do that. It needs blood and blood vessels as well. So let's talk about how the heart's going to work with other things. We have these things called organ systems. An organ system is an interaction of specific organs in order to perform an overall function in the body. So if we think about the cardiovascular system, we think heart, blood, and the blood vessels, right? The pump, the container, and the fluid that goes in it. And so the aggregate of those things allows for us to transport things like oxygen throughout the body. So the organ system is allowing for an overall bigger function. And then, of course, we know that the heart and the cardiovascular system do not comprise the entire body. There are lots and lots of other things. So the whole that we want to talk about is the organism. The organism is the highest level of organization in the body, and it requires all of the body systems to work together in order to maintain life and health. So the next couple of lecture topics, as I mentioned, we're just going to basically start. We're going to do chemical, we'll do cellular, we'll do tissue, in order to really, really appreciate what's happening at each one of those levels, so that when we do talk about organs and organ systems, we can talk about them on the molecular or on the cellular or both levels. All right, now, if we think about that discussion as sort of, in conjunction with just basic anatomy and structure, we then have to talk about the basic functions. So let's talk basic functions of all living things. I hope you appreciate my little animations here. Living things obviously extend beyond just humans, so some flowers and whatever kind of animal you think that maybe is. And I do want to mention that the basic functions that make up all living things differ a little bit depending on what book you're reading. So these are the 5 that I want to focus on, and I think that you'll find them to be both adequate and incredibly useful. So the first function of all living things is responsiveness, the ability to sense and react to changes in the environment. So an example of this would be sweating in hot weather. So you go outside and it's 100 degrees out there and your body says, wow, it's way too hot for me. So the response is that the body is going to drive the blood vessels to be more dilated, closer to the surface of the skin, and allow sweating in order to allow your body temperature to decrease. The next example is growth. Growth is increasing the size of a part of the body or the entire organism. And the examples that we could be talking about here could be growth and development, growing from 2 years old to 10 years old to 25 years old. We could be talking about bodybuilding, making your muscles bigger, specifically making the size of the cells bigger, or we could be talking about eating at McDonald's every day. So, I mean, any number of things that affect the body's going to respond by possibly growing, getting bigger. Number 3 is movement. Movement is the use of muscles and bones to move the organism, or the use of internal structures to propel things like food or blood throughout the body. So I think you're going to find that there's a lot of instances where we are, considering what happens as you think of the whole organism exchanging with the environment, but then you also need to think about the internal environment and what exactly is happening inside of the body all the time. And that's really what we're going to spend most of our time talking about, is what is happening on the inside. So we can already start thinking that way when we think about movement and moving stuff around inside the body so that it can make the cells happy. Next is metabolism. Metabolism refers to all the chemical reactions that occur in the body, and basically we need metabolism in order to make energy, and we need energy in order to continue to function in any other way that we normally do, whether it's building proteins or allowing, certain types of transport into and out of the cell, making sure that we eliminate waste products as we need to, things like that. And then lastly, we have reproduction. So reproduction, again, occurs just like some, the themes that we've been talking about already, occurs at the cellular level and at the organism level. So obviously reproduction, making more of us, right? We can make babies, and so because we can do that, we can survive, generation after generation. But also the individual needs to survive. In order for the individual to survive, the cells need to survive. And so the body is going to constantly and this is not going to be true for every single cell in the body. There are certain types of cells that can't regenerate, but for those that can, we want to consider that, we're going to make more cells because the cells are going to get old and die too, and we want to be able to survive the organism. So with that, those 5 basic functions, we're going to sort of relive those quite a bit, but I do want to apply them to the organ systems that exist in the body. So let's talk about the organ systems. There are 11 organ systems in the body, and I'm writing for you a little mnemonic. I actually think I learned it in like 6th grade or something, which is Murders Inc. If you can remember those, then you can remember at least 10 of the 11 body systems. And for some reason, when I was in 6th grade, there wasn't, no discussion of lymphatic system as a body system, so it wasn't on the list. And so I put the L at the bottom there for you as well. So let's just list them quickly, and maybe you know them already, but just in case you don't. So they are muscular, urinary, which is also renal, and I probably will refer to it as renal more often than urinary, not for any particular reason, just because I will. The next is reproductive, digestive, endocrine, respiratory, skeletal, integumentary, nervous, circulatory, or cardiovascular. I think those 2 terms are interchangeable, and if not, they're at least, in my brain in my class, so I'm good with either one. And then lastly, lymphatic, which refers to the immune system. I think that for the most part, it's kind of intuitive what the body systems are referring to, but just in case it's not obvious, integumentary refers to things like the skin, the hair, and nails, and endocrine refers to the production of hormones in the body that allow for chemical messaging. So I think everything else is good to go. All right, so I want to just line up the functions that we had discussed just a minute ago. Those functions right here: responsiveness, growth, movement, metabolism, and reproduction, and just sort of draw some comparisons. So we could say, okay, let's think about, any one of these. Let's start with reproduction and say, what can it go to? Well, obviously it can go to reproduction, but as you can see, I think it's possible to relate, many other of the functions to the specific organ systems. And really, I think that in summary, every single body system does all of those functions in one way or another. And so we will, over the course of this class, we will get around to seeing in just the ways that is in fact the case. All right, that concludes our introduction and overview of the human body, just enough to get us started. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.